Good morning, everyone. My name is Antonio Montiel, and I'll be recording today today's Planning for Instruction lecture. Um, it will be specifically in biology, and the subtopic is genetics, Mendelian inheritance. And here we go. So, planning for instruction. So, the content area again is biology, in specifics, genetics, genetic variation, inheritance, understanding Mendelian inheritance. The lesson objectives. So by the end of the lesson, students will be able to, number one, explain the basic principles of Mendelian inheritance, including dominant and recessive traits. Number two, predict the outcome of monohybrid crosses using Punnett squares. Number three, identify examples of genetic variation resulting from different inheritance patterns. So that's the lesson's objective. Anticipatory set. So begin the lesson by showing a short, engaging video clip that introduces the concept of genetic traits using familiar examples such as the phenotypes, such as eye color, flower color, or animal fur patterns, anything that's in relation to physical traits. Then I'll be asking students to consider why family members often share similar traits and how these traits are passed down from one gen to the next. So there's 4 different types of instructional strategies that normally I would take place when I teach this particular subject in classrooms. So number 1, which is the most common one that I use, is direct instruction. So I present a brief lecture on Gregor Mendel's experiment with pea plants, focusing on the discovery of dominant and recessive traits using visual aids like diagrams of pea plants and Punnett squares to illustrate key concepts. Number 2 is guided practice. So work through a few sample monohybrid crosses with the class using a Punnett square. So obviously I do give those guided practice problems, worksheets, kind of like a hands-on project, if you will. Asking students to predict possible genotypes and phenotypes of offspring based on the parent's genotype. Number 3, I would make them work in pairs to complete a worksheet with various genetic cross problems, encouraging discussion and peer teaching as they solve the problems together. I typically will always have a easy to medium worksheet and then a harder / challenging worksheet. I have found that there's at least 2 to 3 kids that want to choose the challenging worksheet just because they feel like they get the subject, they understand it, and they just want it to be a lot more challenging. And then lastly, we finish the class with the class discussion. So after completing that worksheet, we discuss the answers as a class. I'll have kids pass up to the front of the classroom and do them in front of everybody and so on. Then we emphasize the concept of probability and genetic inheritance and how it applies to real-life scenarios. Right. This will then tie into disorders, genetic variations, genetic mutations, so on. Some assessments, right? So I give formative assessments, review students' completed worksheets, monitor their participation during the class, and assess their understanding of topic. And then I will give actual assessments, such as quizzes or exams, so that can definitely be put in here as a form of assessment. Differentiation strategies, So again, just like I mentioned before, so we have those visual learning opportunities such as those slideshows, even color-coded Punnett squares, and possible charts. For kinesthetic learners, use physical models of chromosomes and alleles to demonstrate genetic crosses. This one's a little difficult, even though I have put it on paper, I haven't necessarily done this one. Just because we do Punnett squares. We don't touch into chromosomes till later down the road, again, like in those genetic mutation problems. For those advanced students, so like I said, offer extended activities involving dihybrid crosses or non-Mendelian inheritance pattern. We do talk about, those 12 box Punnett squares later down in the chapter. So if these kids are well in advanced, I would definitely give them a simple worksheet on those 12 box problems. All right, and then closure, right? So we summarize the key points of the lesson by reviewing the principles of Mendelian inheritance. I will be asking students to share one thing that they found interesting or surprising about how traits are inherited. We end with providing a preview of the next lesson, which we dive into deeper, more complex patterns of inheritance, such as, again, those genetic mutations. My reflection, right? So I believe my presentation was effective in clearly communicating the principles of Mendelian inheritance and engaging students with a mix of instructional strategies. The direct instruction provided a solid foundation, while the guided practice and collaborative learning allow the students to apply their knowledge and reinforce it. I think what went well was the integration of different learning styles, again, through those visual aids, so the lecture part, hands-on activities, those worksheets, which help to maintain students' interest and cater to diverse learners. And also, putting them in pairs. I think that definitely has helped out in the past, and looking forward to doing that again. I would continue to use a variety of instructional strategies to ensure all students can engage with the material itself. And then lastly, to improve this lesson plan, I think I would incorporate a little bit more real-life example problems that are relative to students' lives, even perhaps using case studies or current events related to genetics. And in terms of presentation, I would focus on pacing, making sure that I have enough time for each activity while keeping the lesson dynamic and interactive. Thank you so much for listening to me and going over planning for instruction, specifically on biology and genetic inheritance and genetic problems. Thank you so much.